month of March should be about letting the NBA breathe, stretch run, play in, end of season on April 10th. Let's just see how everything kind of filters out. But I figured we would do a little bit of a video because of the buyout market fizzled. We always talk about the second trade season, the buyout market. A year ago, the NBA social media world was up in arms because of LaMarcus Aldridge going to Brooklyn, Blake Griffin going to Brooklyn, Andre Drummond going to the Lakers, and how unfair big market teams were as far as gobbling up these former all-stars. People wrote about it. I'm sure people stood outside of Olympic Tower on 645 Fifth Avenue in New York and picketed the commissioner about we need a rule change and it's unfair for these big markets. And I just said, like, pump the brakes here, man. Like, this thing goes in cycles. And I think you saw this year another one of these years where everything kind of goes in cycles. We had 4 players that were bought out of their contracts. Goran Dragic, who went to Brooklyn, was bought out in San Antonio. Tomáš Satoranský was bought out in San Antonio. He goes to Washington. Kevin Pangos took a $100,000 buyout to go overseas. And Tristan Thompson, who's probably the best of the buyouts, went from Indiana to Chicago, right? All is good in the world. No one had a disadvantage. Free market. Anybody who had the right to sign him. I think when you look at why so few, and you can look at it, I mean, last year there was only 4. 2020, there were 8 players that were bought out, eventually signed. To give you kind of a peek behind the curtains when you go through this buyout process is that if you're a player who is still in the prime of his career, like Gary Harris in Orlando, and is playing between 25 and 30 minutes, yes, Orlando is going to finish in a lottery. Their season is going to end in early April. There's not going to be a play-in or a playoff series for them to showcase, Harris. You're thinking, well, where would I rather be? Would I rather be in Orlando playing 25 to 30 minutes, auditioning myself, or would I rather be on a play-in team, a team that maybe loses in the first round? I don't know what my role is going to be. Yes, the head coach and a GM can promise me 20 to 25 minutes, but what happens if that doesn't happen? And I think there's a comfort level of players, certainly on players that are on either lottery teams, to kind of just play out the season and go into free agency. And here's the lesson regarding the buyout market, and it backfired big time last year. And that's when you talk to agents, who had potential players. They look at the Andre Drummond situation last year, where Drummond took a buyout from Cleveland, had Lakers, Brooklyn, Charlotte, Dallas as teams that were interested, goes to the Lakers, plays, gets injured, his role is reduced in the playoffs, and then all of a sudden we get to the offseason and Andre Drummond is chasing that minimum contract. The disadvantage in the buyout market is you lose bird rights. So if Harris would have taken a buyout, this market is not much cap flexibility. Teams are limited on exceptions. Is he chasing a minimum contract where at least for the next 6 weeks he can kind of continue to audition himself? And I think he's above a minimum player. Dragic, Satoranský are different. They're kind of in the back end of their career. My only concern with Dragic going to Brooklyn, and I'm going to talk about the Nets in a minute here, is that when Ben Simmons comes back and you've got Patty Mills, you've got Seth Curry, what is his role going to be? He played 14, 15 minutes in the loss against Toronto. What happens if Brooklyn doesn't get past the play-in, where he could have had an opportunity to play on a Milwaukee team that is probably going to advance pretty far? So that's the buyer beware, and I do think the buyout market is a little bit overrated here, and it does go in cycles. And no, we don't need to overhaul the rules as far as the big market, disadvantage over some of these smaller teams. Satoranský went to Washington because he already had played there. There's a comfort level. Dragic went to Brooklyn because he played with Steve Nash. Tristan Thompson, as I said, is probably the best one. Goes to Chicago because there's a need there. And every team has the right, as we said last year, when everyone was up in arms about Blake, the right to sign these players. And I saw a situation right before COVID hit. Jordan McRae, good example, where he took a buyout in Denver because he wanted to go play more, goes to Detroit, COVID hits, their season gets wiped out, and I don't think we've seen Jordan McRae since, where he could have maybe stayed in Denver and been on a playoff team. So it's a delicate balance that the agent has to work on as far as what's best for his client, for his next contract, as far as taking less to maybe go to another situation here. So the buyout market, I guess it fizzled, but I do think we kind of overrated a little bit because, as I said, it does go in cycles here. And Gary Harris in Orlando is the best example. I mean, everybody was talking about Gary Harris, a buyout, Robin Lopez, a buyout. They can go to Milwaukee. They can go to Denver. They can go to some of these other teams. And I think you have to have a role carved out because players like Harris, they're looking out for their next contract, and the last thing you want to be doing is getting DNPs, and that's my concern with Dragic. If Brooklyn gets a short, playoff stint, it could impact them next year. Regarding the Nets, I said a comment last week, and it was like throwing meat into the wolves' den about Brooklyn, and I don't understand, and I know Kevin Durant is coming back here, how the odds makers and it's basically shoved down our throat as far as odds on games and odds on who's going to win the championship. So it's hard not to see where Brooklyn is the favorite. They are, as of Tuesday, one game above 500. They would play Toronto in a play-in game on the road without Kyrie Irving. If they lost, they would come home and probably play either Atlanta in an elimination game. Winner goes, loser goes home. Winner goes to the playoffs and would have to play Miami or Chicago. And I just don't understand, because when are we going to see Ben Simmons? We don't know about the vaccination status in New York City. I mean, the mayor has basically kind of drawn a line in the sand here based on, and he's got a point where they just laid off 1,500 employees, and then all of a sudden they're going to lift this vaccination mandate, and we can debate on and on about if there should have ever been a vaccination mandate. That's a different story here. So we don't know if we're going to see Kyrie Irving in home games, playoff games. We're certainly not going to see him in Toronto for if there is a play-in game. Durant is, top 3 player in the NBA. We don't know when we're going to see Ben Simmons. Are we even going to see Ben Simmons for the rest of the season here with his back and conditioning? So the Brooklyn as the odds or one of the favorites is totally baffling, and I think it's a little bit of a disrespect to some of the teams up top. Certainly Miami, Chicago, Philadelphia, who is certainly, I think they are probably the team to beat out of the Eastern Conference. And yeah, I was hard on James Harden, and when I said it, potentially that could be the worst contract in NBA history down the road, and I'm looking 3 years from now. I'm not looking at it right now, and Daryl Morey, their president, is looking at it right now. I mean, he's looking at it to win a championship, and my biggest beef with the Harden situation was I felt he quit. And I know he won't be the last person to quit on his team, certainly not the first. But I just thought that how he played towards the tail end in Brooklyn, and if he was on Charlotte or if he was on Houston or on the other teams, I would have been as hard. But I thought Harden quit on the Nets. I thought he was out of shape. I thought he was disinterested. And now he goes to Philadelphia, and you've got the FedEx man. I'm like, who is coming to my house? You hear the doorbell rings, the dog is barking. Oh my goodness. And so Harden goes to Philadelphia. Let's see when this competition gets a little bit better. I'm not going to, the JV in Minnesota coming off a a win against Memphis and then New York. I'm not ready to kind of put the parade down Broad Street in Philadelphia here, but those two, as everyone's witnessed, is lethal. I think they are certainly the team. Them, Miami, Milwaukee, not ready to buy in on Chicago yet, are probably the teams to beat in the Eastern Conference here, and that's the reason why I was hard on Philadelphia as far as, with James Harden. As far as I just felt that he quit on Brooklyn, left a little bit of a sour taste, not just in my mouth, but everyone's mouth. But as I said, not the first person to quit on a team, won't be the last. We all move on, and now we kind of focus in on the game and the stretch run here, and this Philadelphia team is rolling. And we should put them up there as far as one of these top teams in the Eastern Conference to talk about. The Lakers, I'm not going to kind of dive deep in there. It's kind of one of those bad reality TV shows that you're flipping the channels and you want to you can't keep your eyes on it, even though it's probably not good to watch. And it's going to be interesting. They're going to be in the play-in. That is. I'm going to guarantee that Portland is not going to catch them, and certainly with the Nurkic injury, they will lose in the play-in. They will not be in the playoffs. They will not. I don't even think they will beat a New Orleans team in a one-game play-in. They certainly, I don't see them being a decimated Clipper or a good Timberwolf team. I don't. I think their season ends in early April. And then it's going to have to figure out as far as what is next. And I think we get in this bad habit of always focusing in on like what went wrong or what happened in the past, or we're going to talk about the Westbrook trade. And I think it's important to kind of look what is going to be next. And I'm going to write about it. We're going to have all these off-season articles coming out. That's what I'm doing right now. It's kind of taking a thing of clay and molding it together, and eventually we kind of spit out an article on every one of these teams, and have not started on the Lakers yet. But how this team improves comes down to basically two things. Maybe we can add a third here. One, what can the value of Russell Westbrook turn into? Will be challenging on that expiring contract. Two, do they take calls for Anthony Davis, and what can Davis turn into? I'm not going to go down the LeBron James trade value path here. I think that's basically like picking up the red phone as far as DEFCON 5 as far as there. But I think those are the two things as far as how this team changes the dynamics. Is Westbrook, what does he turn into? What is the value of Anthony Davis? And Davis is interesting because considering what they gave up, draft picks, players, Brandon Ingram, that group there, Lonzo. The value of Anthony Davis in 2022 is not the same value as Anthony Davis in 2019. It's almost like you going to buy that fancy car. Well, eventually when you add, 60,000 of miles in it in over 3 years, the value of that is not as high as it is now. And we see in this day and age where, wings, guards, the league is changing. Yes, Embiid and Jokic, dominant bigs. My concern is the durability of Davis, just like it was in New Orleans. I don't see him fetching a all-star package that is going to turn around this Laker team. And then it basically shifts to the bench, the minimum market, the tax mid-level exception. And as you guys have seen this, Kent Bazemore, DeAndre Jordan, Rajon Rondo, Trevor Ariza, Avery Bradley, Wayne Ellington. The names go on. And where I think the Lakers have missed out, and I know people probably gets nauseating when I keep on mentioning the Miami Heat. The Miami Heat have built a great infrastructure where they've used their G League team for, Gabe Vincent, Max Struss, Omar Yurtseven, players like that where they've developed, and now those guys are kind of that next line of defense here. And that's something that the Lakers haven't done. Stanley Johnson, yes. But they are so reliant as an insurance policy for these veterans that, let's face it, are basically just holding down a roster spot and are of no service. And I think that's the trend that's going to have to change if you're the Lakers, as far as don't be so reliant on these veterans, 7 or 8 of them that are in their mid-30s that are not going to contribute. And we can talk about the Westbrook deal all we want, and then we're 15 minutes in here, but that's why the Westbrook deal has been exposed so much, is because they've done a poor job outside of probably Malik Monk, and Carmelo can give you what he can offensively, but they've done such a bad job on the Mark Spears, my buddy, is texting me. I'm like looking at him like, who's that? They've done such a poor job on the back end of the roster that the Westbrook trade has been exposed. So that's my 15-minute rant. We haven't done a video in a while, so I just wanted to talk about the buyout market, a little bit of Brooklyn, LA. I think the one thing too, I'm going to end it like this. And I know we're in this business of the media, and it's, Lakers, Brooklyn, those teams are the names. I do think we have to, and Nate Jones, who is on Twitter and works for probably one of the best marketing guys out there, works for Goodwin Sports. He's like, sometimes we just need to focus on the basketball, right? Like sometimes we just need to enjoy Ja Morant in Memphis, Luka in Dallas, what these other teams do, Kyle Kuzma in Washington. Like, it doesn't have to always be like transactional and about who's disgruntled, who wants out, where is LeBron going to go in 3 years. And I know that's the headlines and that's the business we all signed up for, and that's fine. But there does come a point where we do need to enjoy Embiid and Harden, Ja Morant in Memphis, Phoenix, great story. Some of these other young players here. So that is my rant.
Thanks for watching ESPN on YouTube. For live streaming sports and premium content, subscribe to ESPN Plus.